overflow. The sections are going to be dry for the next 3 days, and we'll see you back here.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to the Brand Innovators Livecast series. Today's event is Identity Resolution and the Cookieless Future. Some quick housekeeping. I was told to say this. If you are looking for help, I am stuck in the metaverse and I can't get out. That, like cookies, has also been moved to 2024. Ironically, this is the link to the Cookieless Future and Identity Resolution Livecast series. My name is Kristen Dolan. I'm the VP of Media Strategy and Innovation at Influential. I will be your MC for today's event, guiding you through our panels and fireside chats, helping you make sense of this ever-changing privacy landscape, also keeping cookie puns to a minimum as promised to my LinkedIn community. We have a thought-provoking agenda for you today with an awesome lineup of marketers coming to us virtually from companies like Kellogg, IBM, and Chipotle. This event is 2 hours, broken into 3 40-minute sessions, kicking off with a panel Q&A followed by 2 fireside chats. We'd like to thank all of the marketers for taking their time to speak and present here today. We'd like to give a big shout out to our sponsors for helping make this event possible. And we'd like to thank our audience for taking the time to be here with us today. Reminder that we are live. So the Q&A widget is at the bottom of your screen. It can be used to ask questions. We'll get to them at the end of each session where we can. The chat widget is there too. It's just for our audience and listeners at home. You can use that to connect with the attendees and discuss the event in real time. So without further ado, our first segment is a panel Q&A with the Kellogg team, moderated by Corinne Casagrande. She leads Broadbeam Performance Group at Active International. Just a quick general sense of the topics being discussed today. In this panel, we'll be talking about the impending deprecation of cookies, how brands and marketers can prepare, thoughts on how the loss of cookies is accelerating digital transformation, and the importance of building addressable audiences, leveraging both first and third-party data. So joining us from the Kellogg team, I really hope I pronounce all of your names correctly, so please let me know if I did or did not. Nicole Vinson, VP of Digital Media and Omni Shopper Experience. Lauren Dubnow, Senior Manager, Global Media Measurement and Partnerships. Luis Cotterill, Global Senior Director, Full Funnel Marketing, AI, Machine Learning, and Paul Lukes, Marketing Director for Digital Marketing, First Party Data Strategy, and CRM. How did I do, you guys?
Fantastic.
Great.
That was absolutely perfect, yeah.
Oh, okay. All right, guys. Well, consider me the Oscar music. So I will come back on at around like 12:35-ish, but please do not stop the conversation. Let it come to a natural stop. Feel free to finish your thoughts and if we have time, I'll lead some Q&A, and then we'll be on our way. So with that, I'll kick it over to you, Corinne, and enjoy.
Hey, thanks so much, Kristen. Really excited to be here today to talk about some topics that we've really been talking about quite a bit in the marketing community, not only because it changes every day, but because the solutions also change every day, and really excited to be here with a company that's doing it right. So I'd like to kick it off and just start and ask Nicole a question, and also have everyone just introduce a little bit more about their role and what they do at Kellogg, just starting off with some of the information. So Nicole, when do you predict cookies will actually go away for good? Because we've been fooled before. And what are you doing to get ahead of the cookies at Kellogg?
Yeah.
And a little bit about your role and background and why you're the person to lead this off.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really great to be here. Thanks to the Brand Innovators team for welcoming myself and my team. So I'm Nicole Vinson. I lead a lot of our global marketing capability and the overall marketing transformation strategy in partnership with the many folks from my team that are on today's call. And so I'll have the rest of the team introduce themselves, but you've got a nice flavor of the team who is leading everything from advanced analytics to how we're evolving our measurement and our audience strategy, and then really how are we driving forward our first and third party data strategy to really combat the overall deprecation of the cookie. So really excited to be here today. So if I think about what's happening right now, obviously I was just on a call earlier with some of our agency partners and looking at 2024 is when I guess now the new date is that we are going to deprecate the cookie. But ultimately, this is really imminent. It's happening now. And really brands and marketers really need to be addressing sort of how they're going to tackle this quickly. Because, driving change in your organization can take time. And, if I think about our journey here at Kellogg, we're really starting to make a ton of investments in growing our first party data set, not only in the US, but across the globe. And really building and strengthening those third-party data partnerships and figuring out who are the right partners, whether that's through media partnerships, through other addressable audience data sets like Axiom or Epsilon or LiveRamp, for example, but also really figuring out how we're going to partner with our retailers as more of our investment starts to shift to the retail media networks and our overall mix of our marketing investments. I'd also say that, here at Kellogg, we are building digital marketing language and a foundational knowledge base across all of our marketers internally to help them to set the goals around data acquisition and how they can get to a better understanding of who their consumers and shoppers are. And then working through to drive a lot of governance around the activation of the data and the overall acquisition of that data that we're generating. So hopefully that gives a good flavor of kind of where we are and what we're starting to do to get ahead of this.
It's a tall order, Nicole, and it's a lot of different initiatives and prongs that you have going forward. You're all the way at education and stakeholders for everyone within the organization, but for companies who are just getting started, what would you say is kind of the first thing you should be paying attention to and to be able to start that roadmap and roll out for people who aren't necessarily as far along?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to really understand your current state environment and how you're operating today. It's critical to look at your current marketing investments and really understand how much of that investment today is reliant on cookie-based targeting. In addition to that, start to unpack how much of your media investment is really in addressable channels. I think also it's critical to look at, how are you driving your first party data acquisition and strategy? How are you building your insight and audience capabilities around that? And then also really taking a look at how you're measuring the impact of your investments and what percentage of your investments are really going to be impacted by the loss of cookies. And then I think the last piece that's really, really critical as we're moving into, more identity resolution, more first party data sets and addressable audiences, but it's really, how is your company set up for success around the data privacy foundation that you're setting and how you're collecting and activating all of this data? Because if we think about just the regulatory environment today, it's critical that you have a lot of governance in place, processes and best practices to manage that data, but also to put consumers in control of how you're using their data to reach them as well.
Got it. Yeah, very important to get started and think about not only your investments and how to make them work harder, but future-proofing everything for regulatory and setting us up for success with the data infrastructure. So I'd love to kind of turn now to Lauren and hear a little bit more about your role at Kellogg and in this process, as well as, coming out of that expertise in your particular role, dealing with the tools and resources that might be able to help and some of your learnings there, either good or bad, on what you found and what was useful and what wasn't when you started this future-proofing journey.
Sure. Hi, it's nice to meet you, Corinne. I'm Lauren Dugno, and I have the pleasure of looking after global media partnerships and measurement here at Kellogg. In terms of tools and resources to get started, similar to Nicole's sentiment, I would say first and foremost is really, identifying a common language that everybody can speak to in terms of data-driven marketing and what does it mean, what is a data acquisition strategy, what is a global data governance model, et cetera. And then also understanding what is your operations model today and how will it be impacted across the globe. So in setting that, that common language, really understanding what is it that's going to change so that we're prepared. And then the next step or next tool I'd say we created is a first-party data acquisition model that allows our marketers globally to identify growth targets in which they have the right to win based on different data attributes and different factors in each market, quite candidly. And then thirdly, I would say it's been really important to put together a business case in terms of having an owner of the consumer data strategy globally and also data partnerships so that you can ensure you're continually advancing those capabilities in terms of media planning, investment, audience strategy, measurement, and optimization. And then last but not least, when you work within such a large global organization with many stakeholders and marketers, just putting down those fundamentals on paper and creating trainings and playbooks and best practices that everybody can rally around and learn from and standardize that language from is really important.
Yeah, great. Okay, so we've evaluated how customer data fits in our infrastructure. We've laid out a strategy, and we've normalized it and done education for everyone in all of our stakeholders in our organization. Louise, I'd love to turn to you and learn a little bit more about your role at Kellogg, but also kind of where do we go from there? When we discuss this transformation piece, what does digital transformation look like for Kellogg right now? And how are you involved in that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's a reason why there's 4 of us on this call. It's not simple, and we represent really the tip of the iceberg of what transformation really looks like. So my role within Kellogg is actually a new role, and it's reflective of the transformation that we need to go under. I sit in the commercial advanced analytics team in a global capacity, and our role is to really identify within marketing rapid use cases that we can run to quickly get learnings around how we use data technology to better inform our understanding of our consumer and shopper. And that really has to be at the heart of any transformation that you want to do. You're doing it in service of the consumer and shopper. You can transform for the sake of and chase shiny objects, and really it's never going to pay out. But if you've got a really clear understanding of your ambition, and our ambition is really about creating these personalized, inclusive experiences through the funnel, it really helps lead and guide your transformation. But digital transformation has to be holistic. We talk a lot about the maturity of our markets and making sure that we move sequentially as a group. There's no point over investing in technology when you've got no way of activating against it. There's no point acquiring a lot of 1P data if you've got no way of activating it. No point having grand dreams of personalization if you've got no 1P data. So it's really about making sure you move holistically, but also making sure that you constantly test and learn as you go through it. Education and training, as Lauren touched on, is really important, and from the top down as well. Marketing is about to go through this massive transformation, and it's understandable that perhaps our senior leaders aren't as up to speed as maybe some of our other members of our teams. And so top down and bottom up transformation and education is absolutely critical in that journey.
Yeah. Interesting. So with this rapid iteration and the bottoms up, informing the bottoms up, Paul, I think I'd love to direct a question for you about a little bit more about the top down. Everything's changing all the time, and it seems like your job to really stay on top of that and know what it is and be able to make these predictions and ensure that your strategies are future forward without maybe having run some of those rapid fire experience or without the benefit of having data because it's all new. So how do you do that and align with the changing landscape and stay on top of it along with your role at Kellogg?
Yeah, great question. So you nailed it. There is constant change. That is the one thing that we can certainly count on, especially in these spaces. My role at Kellogg is working on data strategy, and a lot of what I'm focused on specifically right now is curating, growing, and realizing value from activation of our first-party database. So we definitely rely on strategies that are future-proofed as we go forward. But at Kellogg, we're really focused on top-tier performance. And so we have a number of strategies that sit beneath that top-tier performance. And we call them our growth boosters. So those growth boosters are winning through occasions, building world-class brands, shaping a growth portfolio, delivering perfect service and store, and people must be our competitive advantage. So those are consistent throughout the entire organization, which Kellogg, like many CPGs, is quite large. So that consistency is very key. Having clarity that they're understood throughout the organization is also very key. When you have that clarity and understanding everywhere in the organization, it really makes it easy to weather the changing landscape because the landscape is going to change. That we can guarantee. So that's how we approach it.
Yeah, I can even tell on this call how aligned and singing from the same songbook everyone at Kellogg is. So certainly the education piece is more important than I realized in the beginning, because you can absolutely see the results of that. So Lauren, if Louise is saying this has to be holistic and there's no point in gathering this first party data unless you can activate on it, how do you work in tandem with her team to activate on that first party data? How can brands tap into it and build better strategies to attract consumers?
Sure, that's a great question. And I'd say first and foremost is really setting up and unlocking those enablers that allow you to acquire first party data. And those range from, putting into place the right operating model, having everybody sit down and agree to what the data strategy is going to be. Again, building that ad and MarTech infrastructure. And then putting a clear process in place to activate upon the data that everybody in the organization, from legal to media to your partners, are comfortable with. And then once that's all in place, really thinking through that value exchange that's going to resonate with your consumers and shoppers throughout their path to purchase and in their basic day of their life, right? That makes them want to interact with you, maybe on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. And it's just so important that value exchange is not only relates to them, but is dynamic, right? So that it can change over time as our relationship changes with our consumers and shoppers, but also as their needs change. So those are really I'd say the key areas that we think about and we've been working on as we talk about acquiring and activating first party data.
Right. Great. And how do you get a sense of that value exchange? How, like Paul mentioned, everything's changing all the time. So how do you get those signals of value for what's valuable to customers and through measurement, understanding a little bit more about that and keeping on top of it?
Sure. I'd say Paul's actually probably the perfect person to speak to about this right now, and I'll let him chime in a second. But I would say, it really takes a good test and learn strategy to see what works and what doesn't work and resonates with different groups of consumers and shoppers, so that and really drilling into those core data signals to understand their purchase behavior, their interests, their attitudes, what it is that moves them on a day-to-day basis. But if you could start there and then implement a test and learn strategy to see different types of value, to test different types of value exchanges, then you can, from a measurement standpoint, begin to see what really works. But Paul, I would swing it over to you to see if you have anything to build there.
Yeah, no, I think you hit on the keys. I mean, obviously, the consumers are looking for experiences that fit into their lives. So, you're constantly testing and learning to find out, how you could get there and how you can execute those. So, I think you covered it quite well.
I
Right.
I would add to that as well. It's not a one size fits all approach. Depending on what you want to acquire and who you want to acquire, it's not just a kind of like, you'll always give data in exchange for this. Different audiences want different things from your brand, and exactly as Paul said, to fit into their lives or add value to their lives. And it's rarely a one size fits all. What you give in exchange is what you'll get back. So if you want people who are loyalists to your brand, offering money can't buy experiences is fantastic. But to someone who doesn't know your brand, that doesn't really mean anything to them yet. And so you've got to be really considerate about who you're trying to acquire in terms of value exchange that you're offering.
Right. We've seen what matters to consumers change dramatically over the last 2 years. How are you, Louise, thinking about the next two? You mentioned setting up vision, using the iterative test and learn, but how are you setting up marketing and digital transformation for the next 2 to 3 years? Keeping an eye to that change in either a sweeping change that you've seen of things that are around to stay for consumer behavior, or just planning out for the future and just trying to stay ahead of it?
Yeah, I mean, that change is going to be rapid. I think the way we do marketing today is not how we're going to be doing it in 5 years' time. And that's going to be driven by what the consumer expects of us. The consumer is going to expect us to understand who they are. And they're not going to really care that for someone like a CPG brand like us, we don't have that last mile transaction. We don't know when they last bought us. They're not going to care whether they expect the same level of personalization as they get from MasterCard or Nordstrom or anyone. They don't give us that privilege of kind of saying, well, you don't know that. They expect that. And so we're really going to be driven about how the consumer's expectations change over time. I think one of the biggest areas we're focused on, and certainly that's in my role, is how AI and machine learning will improve our understanding of consumers. How will it help us generate more accurate, more granular insights? How will it help us create personalized content at scale? And how will it help us measure both the short term and the long term without us compromising on the two? We take very much historically a broad brush approach, and that is the biggest transformation that's going to happen for us with these personalized experiences. But they have to be done in a way that's commercially viable, and also is additive to the consumer's life, everything that Paul said. So, that's really where we're heading to. When we look back and we kind of say, oh, I made 4 ads a year for Pringles, people will kind of go, 4? I make 400, and so It's going to be a very different space that we're leaning into, and that's what the consumer wants from us.
Yeah. So, one-to-one marketing at one point was kind of a far-flung fantasy, and everyone said, oh, AI is going to make this happen. Are we really at a point where we have meaningfully workable AI, Paul? And how confident are you in that? And as well as, the next 2 to 3 years, how it's going to change?
Yeah, that's a great question, and a lot of people talk about AI constantly. I would say AI, ML, they're only as good as the data that you have. And so it is capable and certainly able, but it really, what you've heard us talk about, it really relies upon the data that you have. So we're spending a lot of that foundational time making sure that we have the right data. We're enriching that data, analyzing that data correctly, so that it can enable and unlock what AI can do.
Right. And what advice would you have for brands to better leverage data to better reach their customers, or common mistakes you think can make, or common mistakes that can be made, big learnings you've had? Like when we say, let's, garbage in, garbage out, let's start with a good foundation and use of that data. What are some advice you might have for people watching on what that means in practice?
Yeah, I don't think there are any mistakes. There are learning opportunities in a space like this that's constantly changing. So I think the only mistake you can make is not moving forward. Essentially, as I mentioned, consumers are really looking for personalized experiences. And what do I mean by that, right? They're looking for communications that they receive from a brand to add value. So, really, rather than the old days of being interrupted, they really want you to bring value to them. And how do you build that relationship with them so that you can add value? Requires that you have data to be able to understand that individual and tailor the messaging and targeting. So I'll just talk a little bit quickly about three spaces that we are using data to do things like that. So the first one is just simply like purchase-based data. So, I mean, if either from loyalty card or panel or receipt uploads or anything in that purchase-based capture, if a person has bought your product recently, or they have never bought it, or they've stopped buying it. I mean, I think the interruption that you see a lot of times is not having a good view on, did somebody already buy this product? I mean, stop sending them the message to buy the product if they've already done it. That is a key of having that purchase-based view to provide value when they need it. The other one is really, moving beyond just purchase-based to really have attitudinal and behavioral data so that you can really understand the consumer and shopper's motivations. Why did they buy it? Why did they not buy it? With that understanding, you can really start to look at what the barriers might be for why they haven't bought it, and how can you overcome those. And then I think the last one that I'll talk about is just like, eliminating friction is adding value to a consumer, right? So what we've done is basically adding buy now, whether it's a Micmac integration at the end of an ad, click through, whatever that might be, but allowing the individual to be able to get that product much more seamlessly and on their terms as we move forward. So those are kind of three areas that I would give advice on, but there are no mistakes. You're gonna have learning opportunities all along the way. But
Yeah.
Love that. So there are no mistakes, but there are stakeholders who may notice those mistakes. Louise, how do you do it? How do you convince people like me that AI is an accessible component in the toolbox now? How do you push these things through?
Yeah, you can't do this unless you've got top-down support. There are a lot of impediments to making this successful. High cost of entry, with some of the technology, lack of access to certain data unless you buy it, unproven results within your own company. And so there's a lot of reasons and easy to say no. So you have to get top-down buy-in. And what you also have to have is, and I didn't touch on it before, one of the big things about this digital transformation is the reduction in silos. There's always historically been silos in marketing, whether it's, brand team, experience, e-commerce, shopper, but those silos, they have to be eradicated. And also we have to eradicate silos between supply chain and technology and everything like that. So when you talk about how you get that stakeholder engagement, you have to have your CMO, your CIO, and your head of insights absolutely in lockstep creating the plan together, because they are the ones who will drive that transformation, and they'll drive that transformation that's holistic across the board. If you just go in one direction, you'll pull too far with one guy, you'll be too technology heavy and it's not moving at the right maturity. But when they're in lockstep, the whole organization can move forward as one, because you're going to generate value to the business across insights, activation, and measurement. And so that's where you really want to drive that stakeholder alignment and engagement.
Yeah, I think one other thing I would just add to Lou, what you said, is it's also really critical that you are approaching this as a very agile test and learn sort of innovation mindset, right? And so I think one of the key messages that we're also driving across the organization is this curiosity and experimentation mindset. And I think also with that, it allows sort of more of the freedom to fail fast and pivot. But also being able to carve out the dollars that you need to truly drive the test and learn at a far faster pace than maybe historically we've ever done that before. And if you think about kind of a company like Kellogg, right, we're a 116 plus year old company. And so when you're trying to sort of move at the speed of change, and different planning cycles don't always allow for us to be, as agile. So we're truly having to kind of break down a lot of functional silos, rethink the way in which we budget and invest in some of these things. And then how do we really protect those innovation dollars so that we can test and learn at scale and then scale faster?
Yeah, and I'd say on that as well, the pursuit of perfection is a fool's errand on this journey. If you try to get everything set up just perfectly, it won't work. And so you have to go with these, exactly what Nicole said, these small tests. And we do these kind of like 90-day projects. And if they can't be completed in 90 days, it's not the right test for us. And so it's in and out, it's light footprint. If it works, we've set very clear KPIs on what it means to scale. But if it doesn't work, we leave a minimal footprint and minimal impact onto the business. And that's a constant cycle of what we're doing across marketing all the time.
That's great. We definitely have some compliments in the chat on Kellogg's ability to structure and de-silo in a way that makes this all possible. I'd love to turn to some of those Q&As now, if that works. One of them is about evaluating and authenticating solution providers to maintain reach and evaluate performance. There's a lot of questions here about tools and what particularly can you use. People are throwing out names of certain vendors, and how you deal with the outsourcing versus what you're doing yourself on media activation. So I don't know if who wants to maybe take this.
Yeah, maybe I'll start, and then I'll turn it over to Paul to kind of contribute to what we're sort of doing in the US. I think that, from a Kellogg perspective, we are at varying degrees of maturity around the globe. And so, as we've been digging into different identity resolution solutions, as we look at sort of LiveRamp and Epsilon and Retargetly and some of all these other kind of capabilities out there, there isn't what we've found so far as like a one size fits all in a specific partner. And I think that has to do a lot with the data availability and the size of the audience data sets that we're able to access and rent, if you will. And so I think that, the approach that we've been taking is let's learn from the markets that are more mature. Let's figure out different capabilities and tools and partners that can deliver the use cases that we have, and then continue to sort of start to build our recommendation for that longer term roadmap that might have more scalability for us over time. Paul, any builds from your side there?
Yeah, I think just to build on the consistent theme we were talking about with test and learn, right? So in the US, we certainly are not just picking one and going forward with it. We're actually trying a number of different ones, blending them in different use cases. So, I would just encourage anybody that's in the space to really find out what works best for you and your organization and your data and your consumers, because, it does kind of depend on individual use cases. So coming up with your recipe takes some test and learn.
Great. There is one more question that's not about essentially who are using and is there a single ID, which most people want to know, about a customer data management platform. I think it's more of a general question for brands who are getting interested in using CDPs, and any tips or advice on how you're looking at your individual customer data platform and how that fits within your overall infrastructure. Any advice there from things that you've learned?
Yeah, this is a big topic, I think, internally for us. I think that, a CDP for us is certainly on our roadmap. But I think that the approaches that we're taking today are really more use case based and really trying to understand, what are we trying to accomplish? What are the desired outcomes? How do we drive the insights? How do we do the activation? How do we measure the impact of those activities? And so I think that it's something that we are continuing to explore, but really, I think defining sort of the specific role that it's going to play in our overall solution and ecosystem is still a little bit yet to be determined. But I don't know, Lou or Paul, any other thoughts from you?
Yeah, Lou, if you want to go.
Go for it.
You want me to go for okay? Yeah, no, I agree with Nicole. It's definitely an area that we have a lot of conversation on. One of the things that I'll say is that different regions across the globe have different regulations, different needs. So it does make it good to have a very in-depth conversation when you're trying to do something organizationally across all these regions, because there are some things in the US that we can do that others regions can't do, and vice versa. But honestly, we're again taking a bit of a test and learn approach, and we don't have a defined CDP in place right now. We have all of the pieces in place, and our testing weighs in before we kind of go with one provider moving forward. So we'll see what that looks like.
Yeah, I was just going to add, going back to my earlier point, based on your maturity, as Nicole said, it's on the roadmap, but we've got to be ready to use it. There's no point having it and then just start activating against it. It's a very hefty investment. And so we have to be sure that our markets, our regions, our teams are upskilled, they've got the data, they're able to activate against and have a need to be able to use it. And so it's on the roadmap at the right point when we hit that right maturity to get there. So that would be my advice. Make sure your organization is ready to use it.
And that you've determined the operating model behind it, right?
Yeah.
I think that's also so important in this entire conversation, which is what are you going to outsource to your agency partners versus what are you going to do internally, and who has access to all this information as well.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, you guys. I have one more question to throw into the mix, if you guys don't mind. So for brands that sell their products across multiple retailers, how should they be thinking about future-proofing their first and third-party data strategies?
Oh man, that's a big question. I think that when we talk to our brands internally, it's a combination of first and third party, right? I think that until you have just such a massive data set that's first party, you're always going to need to rely on third party partners as well. I think the big piece with, our retailers and the point of transaction for us is our retailers can provide a lot of great data for us. They can provide great information on the buying behaviors of our consumers and shoppers. They can also help provide us to better real-time sales signals on how we're performing. But I think that it's really important to think about, the overall data partnerships and retail media networks and the role that they're going to play. Versus some of your other data sets and data that you have access to, right? Because obviously more and more data is becoming more readily available. But it's like, how do you size the value that data set brings to you? And is it truly incremental to other data sets that you already have? And so I think that data strategy is what is so critical to really define where you have gaps and where you can close those gaps through these different partnerships.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thank you so much to the Kellogg team and Corinne. I really appreciate your time, Lauren, Lou, Paul, Nicole. This concludes the session. So thank you so much for the time. We are going to welcome Nicholas Greco, Vice President of Sales East at Channel Factory, and Richard Brandolino, Global Media Channel and Ad Tech Leader at IBM for the next session. So we'll give them a minute to switch over. And again, just to recap some key themes from today so far. So just a reminder, digital transformation has to be holistic, find rapid use cases for testing and learning. I think we're going to hear a lot about that today because there is no one size fits all solution, as we know. And that's why there's so many webinars and resources on this topic, right? Because what might work for one brand may not work for another. And then on the theme of consumers, people have varying opinions of what data they share, if at all, with any given brand. And as Louise mentioned, those expectations will also be shifting over time. So hi, Nico. Hi, Rich. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey, thanks so much for having us.
I will kick it over to you. I'll join back in around like 1:15-ish, but consider me Oscar music. So feel free to finish your thought or topic and I'll just jump back in with maybe an extra question or two, but enjoy.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kristen. All right. So hello, I'm Nicholas Greco. So Vice President of Sales at Channel Factory, and with me is Richard Brandolino. Richard, good to see you again. Richard is ad tech leader in the space and specifically leading global media channels over at IBM. It's great to see you. How's everything going?
Doing well, Nico. How are you?
I am doing very well.
Excellent.
Yeah, appreciate you joining us today, and thank you for the BI team for setting this up. So yeah, let's just dive into it. So on the subject, I think it's, as this session just wrapped up, going pretty deep into obviously ID resolution and everything. I think it's, pretty exciting. Obviously a lot related to your specific role. Your tenure at IBM really gives you a tremendous amount of experience in this ad tech space and really allowed you to see this, not only see it, but really be a part of this full picture of digital transformation and how that's really impacted the industry. Can you tell us a little bit about, more about your role and some of the work that you've done to transform IBM's media buying efforts, over the years and how that's changed over time?
All right. Well, yeah, I've been with IBM a long time. It started, frankly, in the very early days of digital media, working here. And at IBM, it's probably not been as long as some people might think. But the last 10 or 15 years, we've really gone from essentially ground zero in the digital media space up to where we're at today. Obviously, before that, we were doing television and a lot of other broadcast sorts of things. But the digital world has really changed things over that time. Started early on, like a lot of other people, doing things like content syndication and webinars and other sorts of things, and primarily focused on our B2B universe, which is where we're at, and have continuously evolved that into the point today where we have a very broad selection of digital media, everything from digital out of home, over the top television, CTV solutions, along with banners and native and social and a very sophisticated search program and everything else along with that. For the last few years, I've spent my time working heavily in developing our programmatic media space and biddable media in general, which has been a really interesting evolution as the universe has sort of evolved really rapidly in that space in the last 5 or 6 years and continues to evolve, which keeps it very interesting and keeps you on your toes on a day-to-day basis.
Always keeps you busy. There's always something new happening.
Yeah. Had a lot of great opportunities, though, to work with some marvelous people. And while I have been involved in the programmatic, some of the search activities, some of the content syndication, webinars, a variety of other things, I've got to hand it also to the team of folks that I work with, who really make all this stuff happen on a day-to-day basis, whether it's the IBM team, our agency partners, or others. This is a team sport, and I'm not ashamed to admit that I don't know everything, but I work with some really, really smart people who keep me on my toes, and that's great.
No, absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. It's a very complicated, ever-changing space, and I think that's probably one of the most exciting things about it is that there is constantly something new to learn every day. But yes, it is on 100% a team sport in this fact. There's no way anybody can take this all on their own. But no, that's great, super helpful. And I guess thought for you on even the media mix portion that you mentioned. How do you guys break that out typically today? Like, how are you thinking about what to assign towards CTV or TV channels or search channels? How are you guys thinking about that today?
Well, we have built some fairly sophisticated models, leveraging IBM technology as well as other technology that we brought in to help us look at that. We look at attribution data, we look at customer interaction data and other sorts of things to help guide us along that way. But we're doing something, that we hadn't done in past years this year, and that is really looking at things brand to demand from the beginning to the end of the funnel, and looking at it by audience. In past years, if you'd have had this conversation with me, what I would have told you is IBM operated by their products, right? Every product team was doing their own thing. Every sub brand in IBM was doing their own thing. And it worked to an extent, but it also was sort of the antithesis of what we actually wanted to do, because it really didn't fulfill our overall brand proposition, which we really want to focus on selling complete solutions to our customer, and knitting together the lots of the little pieces and parts that not having to have our, the individual customers knit them together themselves, right? So we brought our media together in the same sort of way this year. And it's been really interesting to see how that has forced an evolution in the way we attack our channels, because we're able to fully integrate the stuff we're running on TV and CTV and understand exposure and retargeting and bringing that all the way down from the television activities down to the banner ads that we're deploying, so that we can look at the full spectrum of reach and frequency and the messages that we're delivering to the users along the way.
Absolutely. And, I guess going to the cookieless side of the house, right? And thinking about the future, obviously we have a lot of brands dialed into this right now. So, what are the biggest challenges a brand like IBM or really any brand faces when trying to think about how to tackle this new, very privacy focused world, and a cookie-free future somewhere in the distance, maybe this year, maybe next year, maybe who knows how many years it'll get pushed. But what are some of those big challenges that brands should start thinking about?
Well, I think some of the participants here in the last session were kind of talking about a lot of it, right? Who do you work with? How do you work with them? Where do you work with them? Not all vendors have reach into every market you're going to want to go and approach. For a company like IBM, who's a big global company, we operate in 170 odd markets around the world and doing media, not all of them, but a large number of them. Finding a common set of solutions to deploy is really pretty important to us. And that's pretty hard. Frankly, I haven't found anybody that has everything I need in every market. So we've got to start together, knit together different providers that are going to help us accommodate things. And additionally, there are different sorts of requirements in B2B than you have in a B2C universe, right? Some of our folks out there, like in Amazon, right? They operate in a very much a registered user sort of environment. They know who's on their site. We don't know who's on our site. So in that case, we were very much like the B2C universe. But we do have a well-established market. We're a mature company. We have a huge database of our existing contacts, our existing customers. So I really got to deal with the cookieless dimension in 3 different paths, right? The first is looking at things like the hashed email type solutions, where I'm able to bring in known database. And I've got a huge database and millions of contacts that we built up and maintained over the last few years. Those are unknown users, right? That we've largely relied in the cookie space for years in order to be able to target and retarget their interactions on our website, which may or may not, by the way, overlap our install-based customers, which we know very well. Mm-hmm. And then there's customers that we don't know, right? The cases where we've always been buying third-party data segments and other sorts of things to support ourselves. And I think each of these is going to end up with some different solutions in the marketplace as we continue to evolve. The first, again, you've got hashed email kind of borders. In the second place, you've got some of these universal identifier kind of providers out there, and there's a lot of them right now vying for this space. And then you've got the cohort kinds of solutions. So, Google's got their idea of what a cohort solution looks like, but there are other players in the market who are building cohort-based solutions as well. And we continue to talk with all of them. And I think we're going to probably end up with 6 different vendors covering each of these spaces in slightly different ways. And we've got to figure out how to knit that together in a way that actually allows us to accomplish our end goal, which is interacting with that target customer on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, this concept of the universal identifier, that there's still 15 of them. And you have to figure out which one is actually going to work. But 100%, I think it needs to be evaluated by the brand and try to understand what's going to work the hardest for them, what's going to help them reach their customers in the right way, and at the right time with the right messaging. So completely makes sense on that side. And going back to IBM starting off in programmatic, you mentioned you kind of kicked that off with them right from the beginning. So when this kind of all kicked out, was there any thought on future identifiers and things like that? Or was this always, we'll use what we have, we'll move forward from there? Was there kind of caution, concern about certain types of data use or where the future would take you with that?
All right, so there's about 3 or 4 things packed into that sentence.
There's a couple.
We'll start with the easy part. No, we had not really contemplated the entire concept of operating in a cookie-free world. We have been very, very upfront about privacy, not just as the laws have evolved, right, but as a general principle in IBM. We have been very focused on working with our customers, our prospects, those folks who might become prospects in the future, based on an explicit notice and choice kind of environment. And we've been doing that for as long as I can remember. So we carried that forward, when we came into the media spaces here, right? Do you want to opt into future communications? Do you want to opt into cooking? We keep working on that and personalization and other sorts of things. And we've continued to evolve that as the laws have evolved, as the technology evolved, as our understanding of people's desires, right, continue to evolve. So that has been a foundational experience all along. Did we know it was coming? We suspected it might be.
Yeah.
Did we know how quickly it was going to take off? No, not at all. So we've just continued to adapt day by day, week by week, but keeping to that core principle of letting the user tell us what do they want to hear from us, when do they want to hear from us, and how do they want to hear from us.
Absolutely. No, super helpful. And again, I think it's extremely important to take what the user's thinking and how they're feeling. And obviously privacy is a big concern right now, and that's why we're leaning so far and far into this. And now, I know a lot of what you do, in your role at IBM right now is very heavily revolved around, evaluating the supply chain, the partners you're working with, operational efficiency, cleaning up the shop, making sure that you're minimizing that kind of ad tech tax that's going on in the world, where there's duplicative work, where there's things like that. And obviously, many other brands that might be listening in right now are thinking about those things too and trying to get better at that. Are there specific things that you look for or that you prioritize? Is it, cookie-free solutions, identity-focused solutions that are kind of leading the pack on that side? Or what are you doing to kind of really think about that and really break out, what's duplicative, what's not? How do I slim this down?
Yeah, it's a complex question, right? And we started looking at the problem from a supply chain and overall supply chain over 3 years ago, almost 4 years ago at this point. A lot of noise was made. Mark Pritchard and his team talking about how much the ad tax was and how much it was eating his dollars and not fully understanding where his money was getting spent. And our CMO at the time asked the same sort of questions. What are we doing? Where are we spending our money? How are we spending our money? What are we getting for our money? And there weren't a lot of great solutions out there. Right? There were a number of small companies, little startups around the world, who were going to solve the problem in 100 different ways. Log file auditing, blockchain solutions. You can come up with any solution. Somebody had an attempt to go do that. I actually started in IBM in a supply chain group a very, very long time ago. So I looked at the problem and said, very simply, can I apply that basic supply chain discipline that I would apply if I was buying, transistors, nuts, bolts, and screws, other sorts of technology or commodities, right, to the ad space? And the answer was, in large part, yes, we can. Right. So we started by breaking down what the supply chain actually was, what was happening at the various stages of the supply chain, where were we getting this piece from, what was each provider bringing to the fold, what was their value to us, and start crawling through that. Along the way, we found a couple of things. Right. In addition to being able to look at how we control cost, from the direct suppliers, there was also this huge element of fraud in the marketplace. years ago. It's still out there, but in decreasing levels in most markets around the world. How do we get fraud out of our systems? And a lot of the fraud actually was linked to where you were buying your ad space. So by narrowing down the supplier base to those folks that we knew we could trust, we very quickly cut out a big chunk of fraud, which was an expensive piece of the overall puzzle, right? You went from 10% ad fraud to less than 1% ad fraud in just a matter of about 18 months because we trimmed down those suppliers that weren't safe for us to be working with, right? And we started digging into the other places as well. What are we paying the agency fees? What are we paying to our DSPs? How many SSPs are we working with? Are we working with the SSPs because they have the right customers, or are we working with SSPs because they have the right price? Or are we working with SSPs because this, because that? And start peeling that whole onion back a layer at a time until we got a real good handle on what's going on. In the process of doing that, we went from 40% or so of our ad spend going to tech, most of it that we didn't understand, to under 25% today, which is a huge jump, right? It's free money, allows us to reinvest that money and do things more efficiently, or conversely, pay for better quality content, right? Our goal wasn't to take money out of our budget. Our goal was to actually put more money into quality content that was going to reach the consumer. And we made a big progress on that one. Now, as privacy starts to come into it, it's sort of changed the equation a little bit, because now we have an additional set of suppliers that we need to bring in order to provide the services that we're looking for, to be able to identify and interact with these customers. Some of them are very inexpensive. Some of them are very, very expensive. So you got to continuously walk the line between making sure that you're able to achieve your goals with a reasonable expenditure, or not, right? And you could easily get back up from 25% to 40% overhead, just by spending on various platform and identity based kind of solutions to help you drive your goals forward. I don't think anybody wants to go back that far, at least around here.
No, I don't think so. But even, I guess, thinking about that from a, as a marketer that prioritizes efficiency on that standpoint, surrounding identity, are there any things that specifically have stood out from partners that you think are kind of leading the pack on that front when you're thinking about, optimizing towards efficiency?
Well, I think the big thing for us is making sure that the partner has the reach that we're looking for, right? And we talked about trimming our supply chain. We went in programmatic, we went to an allow list model years ago, probably before most people had really considered it as viable. So, when we talk to vendors, one of the things we always talk about is what percentage of our audiences do you cover by market, right? Out of our top, let's say 5,000 vendors, 5,000 websites that we work with, what does your coverage look like? And what does your coverage look like by market? Right. And then the next question you start getting into is, how does your environment work in a B2B space? So if you're looking at hashed email kind of borders, and there's a lot of them out there today, most are built on data that they're acquiring from various consumer environments, telephone records, other sorts of things like that, which are great in a consumer space, but there are very few people out there who really surface their business email address in a wide variety of places. So your ability to penetrate into that market is much tougher. And you've got to start looking at, very specifically, how are they going to cover your customers, and how does that vary by market within their customers? Because they too are under restrictions through GDPR and CCPA and all these laws around the world that prohibit them from just grabbing data for more they want and building a graph. So you start getting into a lot of questions, and some of them do get pretty technical pretty quickly. And then you get to the third set of questions like, so what are you actually doing with the data behind the covers? Right? Just because I have data and my customers have given me data doesn't mean I want to share it with the entire universe. I don't, right? I'm trying to respect their privacy, as I said earlier. So you want to make sure that the people who are processing the data are processing the data in a way that is compatible with the way we want to do business, not necessarily what's the easiest for them. So it's a multi-layer sort of story that you've got to fight your way through.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the B2B world makes it a little bit more complicated too. So lots of fun that comes with that. So, another thought is, solutions surrounding contextual based targeting have been a very large part of the conversation lately, especially with everything going on specific to privacy, specific to identity, and how we have to be cautious with that. And, as you know, this allows you to really hone in on the right content that the ideal audience will be viewing without the need or reliance on those identifiers or those cookies, because we're focusing on the context, right? So at Channel Factory, contextual is obviously a massive part of our offering, and we often run analysis for our clients and find that misaligned content that brands are running on is it's actually significantly higher than they expect it to be. They know there's some level of misalignment, but it is typically significantly higher, which does actually eat into those working media dollars that you mentioned before, when cutting out fraud and things like that. The way we look at it doesn't necessarily have to be fraud. It could be something that's just misaligned and maybe incorrect type of content. Curious to know how you think about that. Whereas dollars appear as efficient, but maybe they're not, depending on the type of content that something is in front of. So where do you at IBM find the right balance between surrounding the right content, but also driving the lowest cost? Obviously, those are two things that become a little bit challenging, like you mentioned before. Being in front of that premium content, you want to be there, but obviously it does come at a premium cost. So trying to find that balance is extremely important to a brand.
Yeah, and it's a balancing act, right? We do leverage contextual heavily in our advertising because it tends to get us in front of the right people. Often we combine that information with other sets of data that we have to get even better. One of the key things for us has been a heavy investment in both SEO and SEM, right? And making sure that we're on the right topics and the right content on our website. Now, the reason I bring that up is because the things that help me find the right people and get that right context in our website is also the things that help us leverage contextual advertising and make it the most effective. Because if I understand the language that's being used by the user to describe their particular problem, whether it's Google or Bing or any of the other vendors around the world where we advertise for search, I can take that same set of data and apply it back into my contextual targeting. We build custom segments almost for everything we do. Very little is a commercial off the shelf kind of segment data. So that SEM data combined with the SEO data, combined with those custom segments from a number of different providers. We work with different providers. Everybody has different strengths, and good or bad. And it helps us a lot find that right audience. There are some newer vendors out there that are starting to offer contextual targeting services for things like CTV, which is, an amazing thought. They're using some incredible AI systems to understand the contextual language and the other things that are going on within that television program, and we're allowed to start applying contextual targeting to video, which is just a huge increase for us. So yeah, contextual is definitely a major pillar for us. Frankly, it performs substantially better than any third-party segment we've ever bought. And it's cheap, right? Relatively speaking. So it's a great thing. And if I can combine that effective targeting with the identifiers that we're able to get that allow us to target not just cookieless, right, but to target cookieless users that exist today, like those fine friends of us using Apple products. I'm able to get even cheaper CPM rates because there's very few people bidding on that traffic from Safari right now.
Yeah, 100%. I think, again, to your point, using that set of combined identifiers with contextuals, that is kind of the sweet spot, especially as video continues to unlock in that space. So definitely very, very exciting on that front. And now I know you recently worked with the ANA on the Programmatic Transparency Playbook, which is really exciting. I don't know if you can tell us a little bit about some of the findings within that report and kind of what that means for marketers.
Yeah, well, we talked about it a little bit, right? So
Yeah.
when I talked about the work that I had done with IBM and how we will attack the supply chain, a lot of that got reflected into the report that the ANA did. But what we've done is kind of taken it from Rich's process to something that we think is much more repeatable for a CMO or other senior marketing leader, both companies large and small. How to think about taking apart your supply chain, right? How to identify your supply chain. Most marketers don't even think about their supply chain as a supply chain. So getting the concept out there, breaking the various elements down so that they can, turn it into a task list and a to-do list for their community, their teams, to go start looking at where the cost is, what's the overlap, what's the value at this point, what's the value at that point, and making some conscious decisions about what quality is actually needed at the various places in the chain.
Mm-hmm.
Most people will spend a lot of money making sure that their ads are brand safe, which is fantastic. Do they spend as much money as they need to making sure that it's not only brand safe, right, but it's brand effective? So, the supply chain, by the way, is not just the outside, right? It's also your inside organization, the copy, the content, the way you're building ads, the way you're deploying ads, how effectively and efficiently you're able to deploy those ads in the market. Somebody said to me a long time ago, the best ad in the world is useless if it's sitting on a shelf someplace, right? So, your goal has to be not just to find the right place, not just to find the right customer, to get it out there in the market as effectively and as efficiently and as quickly as you can to take advantage of whatever the sweet point in the market happens to be this week, because next week it's going to probably be something slightly different.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more. Constantly changing. But no, thanks for those kind of tidbits into that. And again, I do know we covered some of that, which is great. But obviously with the delay of cookie deprecation, again, I know we've all heard it a few different times over the years. As you start to think about this more and more, is that kind of is IBM under the mentality of use them while you got them and go from there? Are you still full steam ahead on identity, focused solutions, or does this slow down? Because I feel like that's kind of one of the things that we've seen every time it gets announced that it's happening. Panic mode, everybody freaks out for a couple of months, and then it slows down. And then as soon as we get the notification about a delay, everyone's like, all right, we'll worry about it in 6 months from now.
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on there. I've heard from other places as well. We've sort of looked at it as not a reprieve, but maybe a delay of execution.
Yeah.
The day is coming, right? The consumer world and the privacy regulators around the globe have made that very clear that this day is eventually going to end. But it's also not delayed, right? So if you take a back and you step back a second, you look at Apple and their browsers and Firefox together, that's almost 40% of the market share in North America.
Yeah.
And they don't do cookies. So while we all worry about what Google is going to do with their Chrome browser, you're already working with 60% of your possible audience. And the second and third tier browser markers, they're coming on quickly as well. So that 40% that you can't touch today, maybe 45, maybe 50% before Chrome ever gets to the point of fully deprecating a third-party cookie. So the delay hasn't really bought us any time. It's just moved the finality, the stake is in the ground and this beast is dead date. So yeah, so we haven't
Yeah.
slowed down. We're continuing to work forward. We know it's going to continue to be an evolution. We know it's going to continue to the inevitable conclusion. I guess the real question is going to become, what is that final date? And I don't know that it matters to me, because I've
And I
got to
think
be ready
that's
for it today, whether it's today, tomorrow, or a year from now. I've got to be ready for it.
exactly. I think that kind of fear has kind of dwindled over time because people have accepted, we're already doing this on some level. We're slowly doing it more and more and more. And I think it's almost easier now to just rip the Band-Aid off and kind of get it over with. So I think most people are already
I'll keep those
halfway there.
I'll keep those third-party cookies, and I'll keep using them as long as I can.
Yeah.
But I don't want to be completely dependent on them, because I can't be anymore. I haven't been able to be dependent on them for a while.
Exactly. Yeah. The only way forward is to think about strategies with and without them, and without the guarantee that they're going to be there next year. So I guess on that note, where do you? I think we're again finally getting to this point. Like, where do you feel that we'll actually be on the situation over the next 2 to 3 years? I think that's really kind of the closing point of that. I don't know what your thoughts on realistically where we're going to be with identity and universal identifiers and where we stand with that.
Well, I think there's an awful lot that's still going to happen. A lot of evolution that's going to happen. I don't know when Google will finally pull the plug on their products. Compound that with the pressure they're getting from regulators in some of the markets. Who knows, right?
Yeah.
But it is pretty clear that we're coming to an end. And along that way, I think it's going to be really important to all of the vendors in this space and all the advertisers in this space to really adopt the mindset that privacy is number one concern, or a number one concern anyway, for the people we're trying to sell to, the regulators we have to deal with, and frankly, our bosses. Nobody wants to be on the end of a letter from some regulator in the world that can make your day really, really bad. So we've got to keep all that in mind as we're building this out, as we're looking at these vendors, whether they're universal ID to vendor or HEMS or somebody else doing cohort kinds of things. It's really important to examine what they're doing with the data you've got, your customers' data, how they're processing it. Are they doing it in a way that is going to be safe for you? Because if they find themselves in trouble with a regulator, you have trouble. So you need to understand what they're doing. You understand how they're processing the data. You understand if they're merging data, where they're merging data, how they're going to use that data, whether it's the data you gave them, data they've captured from other places. At the end of the day, we're going to have to be a little bit of a privacy cop on our own, to try to stay a step ahead of what the inevitable conclusion is, right, from the regulatory communities, especially in Europe and now more frequently in North America with all the laws that are being passed here in the last few months. But Brazil and other markets around the world that are adopting similar laws. We just got to be really, really, really cognizant of what's happening to that data, and we'll evolve from there.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate that. That is super helpful to have that insight. And I guess one last question. I see Kristen joining in. And I guess before I ask that, if anyone has any other questions, I know we have a couple minutes left. If you want to throw anything in the chat, feel free to do so. But just one question related to IBM and some of the technology obviously at hand, like Watson, all the AI tools, all the solutions that IBM is constantly developing, incredible technology. How are you and the team kind of leveraging some of IBM's own built technology when thinking about your own marketing efforts or your own advertising efforts?
Well, there's a lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes. Some parts of it get commercialized through our Watson advertising organization. But a lot of the stuff that we're doing is based on analyzing the data that we've got. We have, for example, our own market attribution-based system that has machine learning and Watson-based technology sitting in it to help us understand the value of every touch that we're making to a customer. We've got other sorts of data that we've used in various places to help us refine our audience work as we're deploying it in programmatic. We've got an ongoing set of analysis going on around our install base customers to try to understand where they're likely to go and how we can meet them when they get there. What are the problems they're dealing with based on data that we can see out in the web, right? People come to us and interact with us through the online environment. We can build and understand patterns of their data and help our sales teams understand the patterns that we're seeing in this millions of transactions a day that we're dealing with. And we can alert our salespeople, right? Here's what's going on in your territory with your customers, right? They're exploring solutions in this space, in this space, in this space. Are you talking to them about that? If you're not, you need to be, right? Now, I used to be a salesman a long time ago, and I got to tell you, in my day, I would have killed for that information, right? It is unbelievably valuable to a salesperson to have some idea of what's being researched at a company before they even get to the point of offering RFIs or RFPs, or maybe it's a research project happening in a corner someplace, within a very large organization. But those things have a habit of sort of helping you lose control of your account if you don't know about them. So the more we see, the more we can know, and the more we can get to the salespeople, the smarter they can be, and they can pick or choose how they engage with the customers on those topics and stay ahead of the customer.
Absolutely.
And the customers do seem to like it.
They do. That's good. I'm gonna have to figure out how you share some of that sales data with us. Need some of that for my sales team, which would be great.
There you go. Maybe at some point we'll commercialize it. I don't know. I don't deal with the product development folks all that much.
Got it. No, super helpful and appreciate that. I don't see any questions in the chat, and I do believe we're at time. So Richard, thank you so much for letting me pick your brain for a few minutes on all this. Anything else you want to leave kind of the audience with right now?
No, just thank you all for taking the time to come listen to me today. Hopefully it's been of some value to you. And feel free to reach out if you have other questions. I'll be happy to chat with you.
Thank you both so much. Really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. All right, guys, one last fireside chat. I feel like Mariano, I am the closer for today. And so I am going to be joined by Amisha Gandhi, who is the SVP of Marketing at Tipalti. And so while we wait for her to come on, already coming on, amazing. Just wanted to quickly highlight some of the key themes Rich was talking about earlier. I really like what he was saying about asking users what level of comms they're comfortable with, really putting that consumer lens forward in terms of the types of communication a consumer is comfortable with. And in Rich's words, as we continue to the inevitable conclusion, we have to be ready regardless. So with that, hello, Amisha, welcome.
Hello, good morning or good afternoon, wherever you're joining from.
I'm really looking forward to today's discussion. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about this. I know we had our conversation. That could have almost been the conversation we're going to have today.
We could have just recorded that, right? So I know, Amisha, you're at Tipalti now. Anything new and exciting on the horizon for Tipalti?
I'm so glad you asked. So Tipalti is a finance technology company. We do finance operations solutions like global payments and AP and PO management for high growth companies like Noom, Roblox, Twitch, Twitter, and healthcare companies and software and tech. So mostly all high growth companies, right, that are looking to grow and get enterprise capable finance capabilities. And so we have a conference coming up, Illuminate, on September 15th here locally in San Francisco and also virtually. So if you're interested in finance, tell your finance teams to attend. We make finance easy across the entire company. It's easy to use. I was telling Kirsten yesterday, I approve actually invoices from my team through Slack. So
that's really awesome. I went back to my finance team after you told me that to let them know, hey guys, Slack, let's get on this.
Okay.
So I'll be sure to remind our listeners at the end about the Illuminate conference too, just because we'll have a lot of meat in between with our discussion today. And so interesting, I always tune into webinars and articles that talk about the cookieless future and identity resolution, mainly because there's so many different perspectives, and the Kellogg team mentioned it, Rich mentioned it, there's no one size fits all. And I think that's really important. And so Amisha, you being at FinTech and I'm at Influential, an influencer marketing company, the cookieless future impacts all of us to varying degrees. And we hope today, collectively, Amisha and I can unpack a lot of that for you guys today tuning in. So if you guys can all humor me for a second, I'd like to set the context for our discussion today, because what we haven't, I noticed the other segments haven't discussed how we got here, right? So to start, there really isn't a single overarching law in the United States that regulates how companies collect, store, and share customer data. There are various industry-specific laws like HIPAA, COPA, maybe ROSCA comes close, the Online Shopper Confidence Act, but nothing that comprehensively holds companies accountable for the customer data they are collecting, storing, and selling. And so begins what I like to call the road to regulation, which before GDPR in 2018, Apple launched ITP, Intelligent Tracking Prevention, in 2017, which limited website tracking capabilities in Safari. Then shortly to follow was the renowned GDPR in the EU. Then, of course, since then, we've had Firefox cookie blocking, CCPA, Apple's ATT, and various state level regulations following CCPA, including Colorado, Connecticut, Utah, and Virginia. Can you tell GDPR ruined my Memorial Day in 2018? So this is my attempt to at least, make good on this. So all of this to say, Chrome cookies phasing out is on brand for this privacy evolution, and regardless of when it actually takes place, currently slated for 2024. So Amisha, what does a cookieless future look like, and why should businesses be paying attention?
So I think we should also already be paying attention. We know that while Google has pushed it out another 2 years, it's coming. And if you really think about just the way we're set up today, and I didn't realize this either, but in most recent, as we're trying to look at solutions and what we want to do and how should we best be prepared, right? Because we're marketing and we still want to drive revenue for the company. This is, retargeting is going to change. So a lot of the ways we do things now, we'll have to make adaptations so we can be compliant. And with all the privacy laws that you're mentioning, right? Also with cookieless. So when you think about the way the world is right now, already 50% of everyone is on cookieless through their browsers, right? If you look at Safari and others, if you look at apps, mobile apps, like people are already outside of what we call the walled gardens, like Google, right? So that's already 50% of the audience that you're trying to reach is already there, right? So that is something to really think about. There is still a huge lag, right, with people getting there, but I think it's time to start. If you don't start when we get there, it's going to be ripping off a huge Band-Aid for everybody. They have also, as we're thinking about this, right, think about it, cheaper CPAs, and it's more of a dynamic CPM. So that will help reduce your costs right now before everyone is there. So it's a good time to start testing, and it's not going to be as impactful, right? You're not dumping 10%, right? It's a good time to experiment. The inventory is cheaper, and maybe you'll get, I'm hearing of some case studies, one of the platforms, Quantcast, where some of their more traditional companies are getting more impressions than their traditional campaigns in, cookieless. So
yeah. I think also, I agree. And I think Rich had mentioned it briefly in the last segment, but building and maintaining trust is a huge component to this. And my point of view has always been that brand safety is a two-way street. So oftentimes, and from my perspective as a former media buyer, when we talk about brand safety, we're talking about blocked keyword lists and is my content showing up in a brand safe context. Brand safety also means, can your brand be trusted? Is your brand safe? So how can I, as a consumer brand, if I give you permission to store my data, it won't show up in a breach. It won't get sold without my permission or knowledge. I won't get spammed multiple times a day. So Amisha, you have a mastery of building efficient customer experiences. I'd love your thoughts on how important is it for brands to reassess how they establish and cultivate consumer trust?
It's going to have to be very clear that that people have given you their consent, right? So choice. So checking all the requests that are coming through, that it is meeting, like we all went through GDPR, right? But this is making sure that what they've opted into, and to make sure we're not, what we've promised to do is what we're going to do, and we don't overstep that. Work really closely with your legal team, right? Because then it will be set correctly. And then, you know, in some cases you may, if you don't have one, get a consent management platform, right? Or, you know, and really think about how, you know, even with your own customers, what is the consent you have with customers? What do you have the consent within the people that are asking, you know, that have come to your site, they've downloaded something, be really clear that they've downloaded it, now you have their information, so they will be receiving notifications, or they'll be receiving emails, or what have they opted into? Make some choices, because I think it's going to be about choices, and making sure that you are legally meeting all the requirements when you're doing that. And also making sure you may want a consent management platform, but trust is a really key important thing, and it takes so easy to break it, right? You hear about the breaches. So also putting on security protocols so people feel like, yes, this is a secure environment, given my information, and the consent is there.
Yes, absolutely on choice. And I believe that giving the consumer more control over the who, what, where, when, and how of their data is the future. Consent is going to be something more democratized. And I'm curious, for fintech, a highly regulated industry, what are some best practices you can share around consent management?
So when you think about getting consent, right, you want to give, like I said, choice, but you really need to work with legal. You need to work with your service and operations team so that you have a framework set up of, if somebody downloads a piece of content, we are going to start offering choices like, would you be interested in a monthly newsletter? Would you like more piece of content like this? You know, do you want something daily or weekly or monthly? We need to think about those things and create those right touch points, because if we all of a sudden now have someone's information, there's an expectation that they want to understand that how the information is being used, and be really clear. This is, you know, we will be able to communicate with you if that's all you want to do, right? Like marketers want to. This is a communications tool. Make it really clear. Your information will not be shared outside of our company. It is really, truly a way for us to communicate. Be really clear in your consent language and work with legal. I think it's really important, because people look at that, and then when they get bombarded, they're like, why did this happen? I didn't choose this. Or I didn't understand that I wanted this one thing, or to watch this one webinar, and now you're, you know, emailing me every day. And your SDRs are hounding me. That's not what I signed up for, right? So are you asking for consent to communicate to them? Are you asking for consent so you could share marketing materials, right? Be really clear, or that, yes, it's okay if somebody contacts you. So
Absolutely.
we need to be very clear about that.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think one of the opportunities this change presents is the ability to enhance customer relationships, because now is as great a time as any to be reassessing the various touch points and gateways into your site, mobile app, store, what have you, and evaluate the purpose of each touch point and whether they optimally drive that desired outcome, whether it's time spent, education, leads, purchase. And I think brands who do this well will differentiate themselves from their competition.
Yeah, I think part of the experience that you can offer, right, is think about all the touch points. Do you need that many? Are they the right ones? And I think if you have to become choiceful in how you're creating that experience and what you're communicating now that you have someone's email, I think, because people opt out now very quickly. So how do you prevent that from, you're going to have some of that anyways, because it's not the right thing, but how do you make it so it's relevant? So that, I think, is going to become even more. I know we talk about the mechanics of consent and we talk about the mechanics of legal. That's what you need, and that's going to be just the bar. But then you have to think about, if we do this and we get it, what do we do with it that makes it really great that they want to stay with you? And that, I think, is going to drive customer experience and touch points even more. And maybe doing less is better versus, you know, bombarding people with a ton of stuff.
Yeah, you answered my next question. I was basically going to ask, what are some ways brands can start enhancing their customer profiles? But I think that is such a great point. And we talked about this yesterday, where going through those touch points to, weed out the ones that are maybe superfluous, or go through, okay, if the KPI of my media is to get somebody to fill out this lead form, what next? What do I do? And have that conversation as a consumer, right? Less about, a brand, and making sure the measurement set up to capture all of that. So on an opt-out, you can consent manage and make sure that you're, not reaching that customer if they've willingly opted out. And so from a general lens or point of view, in your opinion, what steps should brands be taking to prepare for the cookieless future?
I think you need to start testing, right? Either, we use a platform here, through our agency, we use podcasts. There's other tools you can use too, but really figuring out, how do you reach out to people? Because you're not going to be able to retarget in the same way. So there's like hash matching, like there's different ways that we'll be able to really come out and think about how do we reach people in our audience and communicate to them and then get them to come back to us, right? So one is kind of, if you think about it, as more like authenticated targeting, right? So it's not too far away from old party cookies, right? But this is the explicit consent from the actual user, right? So if everybody's wanting to create their own first party data, right? So this is another way of, it's a login screen to a website before you can read or view the content, right? So now you're authenticating, someone's authenticating themselves, they're getting access to your stuff, but it's again a way to get that, and then we'll get a unified ID, right? So Trade Desk does this really well, right? So you get that same ID across a group of websites. That's what this title is, like ID, different approaches, ID resolution, right? And so that is providing a user with a single ID that can be used everywhere. And it kind of matches somebody along, with different IDs, right, within the technology. And then we can use that data and almost create identity graph, right? And so then we can say, hey, we have all these user IDs and they're connected to these data sets. So somebody's, like, we used the example yesterday, if somebody has booking a flight to New York, they will get served up, right, the ads and the right things for certain companies for hotels to book, right? So if you think about that, that gets into more of the anonymous targeting, right? That example, right? But the first example is you get it, or you get into this kind of random ID assignment. So you can, without breaking consent, without overtly retargeting, get the same sort of benefit, right? And then anonymous targeting, right, is one of the ways I just mentioned now is, and then you can also, it's contextualized targeting. So if people are searching for certain things, and based on that, right, you can, and then they engage with your ad, right? You can use that technology to scan the page for other contextual elements, right? And then find pages that contain similar features and kind of bring those things up again, knowing that you're going to hit your target audience again, right? So, that's very technical, right? But it's, how do we do these things? But it's like with authenticated and anonymous targeting, I think those are probably what people are thinking now. And with the tool sets that are out there, probably the two main routes for replacing third-party cookies. But I think people really need to start doing that now, and then measure and see how you do, right, when you're using these different methods. And remember, half the audience you're trying to target is cookieless already. So I just said a lot of it was technical, yes. But it's something to, if you use those two terms, do the research, you can get really in the weeds, work with your marketing ops and your operations folks and your legal teams to make sure you're set. And then having that, right, you can move forward. But I would now is the time, right? Maybe take 5 to 10% of your budget and do testing, because you are going to reach an audience that's cookieless right now. Test it out on those unwalled gardens and see what happens and compare, so that when the change happens, whenever 2 years, 3 years, you're not just caught without any sort of pathway or benchmark.
Yeah. The flight to New York brings me back to my early days as a media buyer on Caesars Entertainment, where we were contextually targeting back then cohorts that have known, or we're visiting OTAs, online travel agent sites, searching for flights to Vegas, right, and then cross-selling with amenity ads for the pool or the chef's restaurant, whatever it is. But what's old is new again is certainly a component to this. And I did write a couple notes down on the first party data side and around employing a smarter way of capturing and utilizing your data as a brand. And kind of distilled it down into 3 steps. So understanding your customers, like number one, and that step involves your data auditing and enrichment, your identity building, like what you were mentioning, Amisha, and then engaging, right? So how to improve your CX as a result of, this better understanding of your customer, giving them an experience that is meaningful. And as Paul mentioned from Kellogg, it adds value to them. And incentivize, right? So the personalization, the promotions, the loyalty rewards, once you do, we spend so much money getting customers and retargeting them. It behooves brands to be capturing and smartly identifying, their ways to collect first party data and delivering a better experience for their customers that just will get you more loyal customers. And one quick shameless plug on the first party data piece. We've written a playbook at Influential on how to influence your first party data strategies, leveraging, you guessed it, influencers. So outlining how brands can tap into creators to reach new audiences and enhance existing first party data collection efforts. So anyone that's interested, I'm happy to send or walk through, connect with me on LinkedIn. But I do want to go quickly back to talk a little bit about performance, because there's so much talk about loss in these conversations, like the loss of data signals, visibility, transparency. Should brands be resetting their performance expectations moving forward?
I think we need to think about that. We will have to set new benchmarks, right? So if once we become completely cookieless, there will be other benchmarks to look at and other measurements. And then once we do have someone's consent, you will be able to use, or you'll be able to use your data, right? But in order to build that first piece, you're going to have to do these other programs, whether it's ID, whether it's having a consent management program, and then contextual, right? Sort of outreach, and then coming back, right? So we need to get ready for that. And, things like JavaScript enabled on your homepage and pixels and other things that you're allowed to do, right? And make sure that everything is compliant once you do that. But you have to do the testing to set the benchmark for yourself. And that's time is in the next 2 years, is to set the benchmark. So you have that benchmark and you have the measurement once you do have it, and then you're able to tie all of that together. And we'll have to look at those signals in a different way, right? Once you do the contextual, you're reaching, at least you're reaching the right people at the right time. Either, on B2C side is point of purchase, but on the B2B side, is it the right persona? They're now looking for us, they're looking for accounts payable. Okay, so we know there's certain signals and we act on those, right? And then we get people there, and then where were they on your site? And having those little tags will help you drive a better journey.
Yes, we at Influential, we do a lot of incrementality testing, and we always encourage brands to beef up an always on learning agenda throughout the year, because there's always stuff to be testing. And so
always be testing.
Always be testing. The Cookieless future is just one of those many tests in your overarching learning agenda for the year, in my opinion, that should be one of those testing hypotheses you want to solve for over time, in addition to many others, depending on, the brand's challenges and needs. And so because majority of our media runs on social channels, the infamous walled gardens, we see a lot of success with incrementality testing. So what is the outcome when influencer media is in market versus out of market, and what is that delta? So we see a lot of success looking at it that way as well. And so I do want to pivot to personalization. That's a big topic, because I do think it's a natural segue from the first party data conversation, which is, and back to my earlier point, I think it behooves brands to deliver personalized experiences to their customers. And it isn't, I don't have to read stats on it. I think common sense dictates that a bad customer experience will turn customers away, right? People want to feel like they're being treated special or incentivized, unlike a one-to-many experience. So, Amisha, how can brands achieve personalization?
So, I mean, there's different ways to do this, right? So when somebody comes to your site, they've signed up, they downloaded, now you get their consent. What are you serving them next, right? You want to have it personalized. If you know your persona and you know what industry they're in, and you now have some sort of information, or for us, it's ERP or industry, then we can go back to them and say, oh, you're in the, so we do payments in the creator economy. We work with influential, right? So it's paying out your influencers, because that's important. Some people are making thousands and tens of thousands. Some people are making dollars, right? So it depends on, how they're getting paid. So when we look at that, we want to work with people who are paying out to customers and networks. How do we help them? So then what happens is they download something around payments. And the next thing that we serve up, oh, we noticed that this person is doing this. Oh, it's in the creator economy space, right? Or shared marketplace or whatever it is. Okay, then the next thing they get is, oh, are you trying to pay, influencers? Are you trying to pay creators is the next asset they get. So then it's personalized based on industry, right? And as you walk them down the line, then when your SDR reaches out, it's like, oh, I understand that you're interested in payments and that you're in this industry and you've read this, what is your payment? So it allows a nice conversation flow and workflow. Some people come in from a webinar. Some people come in from content syndication. Some come in from search. They're, where the source is not where the behavior is. You need to do something else to realize if it's PPC, we know it's high intent. Okay, so that's awesome. But if it's not, what about everything else? There are people who are really interested, and you have to guide them and put behavior guideposts in front of them. When they latch onto one, you're like, okay, if it's step A, now we know it's high intent, someone should call them. Oh, it's step C, it's not as high intent. They're just looking for thought leadership. Let's continue down this path with this sort of content and then try again in the future, right? So then they get put into that path. So you have to really think about what I call the path of personalization, where if A, then they get this. If it's B, then it's this. If it's C, so be really clear as you're creating all your different sorts of drips online and then offline as well.
Yeah, well said. I think brands know what their high value customers look like and how they interact with their brand. And as people are willingly or being prompted to share information directly with you as a brand, it's then the brand's responsibility to deliver those better experiences, exactly how you laid out, Amisha, pending where they come from, the types of pages they're landing on, what they're interacting with, while remaining compliant, and then offering some level of value exchange. So exactly to your point, if I'm low intent, I'm just looking for some thought leadership, don't waste a salesperson's time, giving me a call when they could have made a call that led to a better, a more profitable outcome. So I completely agree with that. And I think that's such an amazing note to take away for those tuning in. Shifting to my next question. So the demise of cookies does not equate to the end of marketing. So what it does mean, however, is rethinking the approach to data capture and governance to ensure your brand is scaling accurately and with consent, the kind of data you're using, how you're collecting it, how it's being distributed, how you keep it secure, so bank account information doesn't get leaked, et cetera. For brands relying on marketing to drive conversions, what are some things brands can do to mitigate retargeting pool loss?
I think that's a great question, right? So when we think about things as loss, we have to also think about what will we gain from this and how do we gain? So as you're testing, what did you gain? What things work better? What things don't work at all? And double down on things that are working and make your investments, right? And then things like ABM and other types of experiences, what you're making offers, like work with other third-party vendors and sites and other places where your watering holes, where your personas are, work with influencers. I started being marketing, influencer marketing SAP. So I'm a big proponent of influencer marketing in B2C or B2B, right? So you're extending your audience. So extending your audience, working with third parties, right? Because they may have consent to your audience already and you're getting tapped into that. And then they come to you and then you get their consent too, right? So you already know what they're interested in. And then setting up your own sort of workflow and getting people to come to you, right? And give you consent. Those are some things you can really do to make up for the loss, but you need to play around with your model now and understand what and ask your customers, what are you willing to give up things for? What do you see that you really want, right? You have your own cut, so ask. So then when you're setting these tests up in your testing, you can be more, either personalized or more direct, or really speak to your audience. Because if something speaks to somebody, they're thinking they're going to get a value, you're going to get consent. So you may not get lost. You may get less, but you actually may get higher quality.
Higher lifetime
about
value.
it that way. But if you provide junk, you're going to get junk back.
Yeah, I completely agree. This is why I love your perspective on this, because media paired with the consumer experience, the site side, is what is the ultimate marriage, right? And I think, and the Kellogg team mentioned it earlier, third-party data can be very helpful as a complement, because so often with the retargeting conversation, third-party data gets brought up. It can be very helpful as a complement to your first-party data, but there shouldn't be only one type of data being relied on for long-term strategies. So what we had mentioned before, the inevitable conclusion, right? Just making sure you're prepared now. And that's why it's important to diversify data strategies. And a quick way to do that, or not a quick way, but a thorough way to do that, is to perform audits on existing data partners. So if the teams listening in haven't already, to understand how your data is collected. Is it deterministic, probabilistic? What is the main identifier that third-party data provider uses to establish matches? I won't give everything away, because another shameless plug, we have a very robust auditing rubric we use at Influential that fuels a more comprehensive matrix of partners. And important for us to have that, because we service clients across all verticals, and we've always had to keep an agnostic thinking cap on to ensure that, as head of innovation, we are delivering best in class innovative solutions for our clients. And that includes our data partners. So Amisha, it's not just about Chrome third-party cookies. Safari, Firefox, ATT all contribute to a blurred perception of online behavior. What are some reasons holding clients back from adopting new tactics?
I think people are like, oh, we have more time. We know what works. We need, and right now, so budgets are tight right now, right? Let's be frank. We're going through a time of transition in a lot of businesses. We're being asked, everyone's being asked all around, we certainly work, and we hear from finance leaders that they're being asked now to think about budgets. What's the holdback? What is crucial to the business? So that's the time we're going through right now. And so in these times, the budgets are tight. People are less wary to try new things, right? And then say, oh, I'm trying something. If it doesn't work, I'm not going to get anything back. And there's no pressure for me to really do anything about it, right? So we can wait a little bit longer, but start thinking about strategy, start talking to people, and start doing a test right now, because it is tight. There is already 50% of your customers, especially in Safari, it's like mostly cookieless. Do some tests now, take a small portion of your budget, do a test. You may get better results, right? Like some of the companies I've been talking to, they're actually getting better, more impressions somewhere else, and it's cheaper, right? So this is a good time to do that, especially if something's cheaper, and you may end up with the same results. Just choose, if you don't have the expertise in-house, choose a good partner. Like yourself, Quantcast, there's so many, right? Like choose somebody to partner with that can show you the way, that's an expert for you and your team. And then you can start testing. And like I said, it is cheaper right now. Those CPMs are cheaper. So, that's an okay test and experiment to do. But I think people who aren't thinking about it, and people who don't start testing in 2023, by the time we get there, you're going to be behind everybody, because you don't know what your benchmarks are. You don't know what will work and won't work for you. So I think it'll get more scary. And then if you have to rip it off and, 6 months up to something or a year, everyone's like, oh my gosh, it's here. Then everybody's going to be doing it. Then cost is going to go up. And so you're going to be doing your testing in a more expensive environment. So just think about it that way. Right. And, I think people should really think about, how do you prove anything out? Right. We're not going to say to a business like, oh, well, let's do these things without having a little bit of proof and some piloting, right? So you can even position as, we need to pilot something next year, because there is going to be a shift away from this at some point, and you don't want to just be left hanging, right? So there's no silver bullet right now. So we're all going to have to figure it out together and see what final approach is going to really work for you and your company, your persona, and your business.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. I think that tried and true tactics are hard to pivot away from, which is why I think I agree. It is business critical to be testing now to inform future tactical and benchmarking strategies. On accounts where we test and learn a lot, the question is, if the tried and true tactics weren't available, then what? Right. Then, and start to prioritize. And like you mentioned before, Misha, cheaper inventory will naturally leads to cheaper cost per. So if you're operating on a cost per KPI, cheaper inventory is the way to go. So,
you can channel and test it out against everything else, right? And see what is really working for you, right? And if it's not, then you can try some other things and work with other partners, right? Because then you're not left hanging.
Yeah, exactly. And so last question for me. In order to thrive in this ever-changing privacy landscape, what should marketers be doing today to navigate? I think we've covered this, but we'll keep going.
Testing. So everyone has like CRO, like, oh, this button or like this option on my website or landing page, this message testing, right? Just make it a part of, okay, cookieless, targeting, and testing is going to be one of the tenets. You have CRO, you have message testing, and now you have this. And it's just another piece that you add to your strategy for 2023. And then you have that, right? So as you're checking out this button or that button, try out, a small 5 to 10% of your budget test on this, right? And lay it out and then say, okay, I'm going to do it for this amount of time. These are the learnings we had. We'll put a stop. Now we know what we're going to do. And here is a bigger plan. Or, hey, we're getting a lot of good results. We're going to shift a little bit more budget here because we're actually getting more from this versus maybe some of the other places that aren't working as well, that are tried and true. We're getting more, right? And you start getting that balance. So we start getting that balance. Eventually, when the shift happens, you'll start going like this or like this, whatever. Whatever. Fancy diagrams, but as one goes down, one goes up, right? Like, so by the time you get there, you'll have a mix. And so when it just goes all the way, you'll know where the potholes are for yourself, right? And your company.
Yeah, exactly. I tried to distill it down into 3 takeaway themes for our viewers. So here's the best I can do. So number 1 is consent. Consent builds trust and better experiences, and trust is the foundation for all relationships, right? Trust and communication. So we've established that. So that's number 1. Number 2, technology audit. And so how and where are you collecting data? What data are you collecting? What's most important to your business and building a consistent identity, right? Are you asking for like PII that doesn't help you do anything, or, making sure that you're being cognizant of somebody willingly handing over their information. And then how are you storing it, distributing it? What does it mean for measurement? And the Kellogg team touched on it a little bit with CDPs, but all of these things need to factor into technology and roadmap decisions. And while you're at it, measurement framework and learning agenda discussions, because the third is test and learn. So you're going to want to find holes. You mentioned potholes. I love that, in your process now versus later, as well as understand how different audiences react to privacy experiences, because some people may be more willing than others to disclose personal information, and some may need added incentive or be entirely turned off by the process and go elsewhere to competition who isn't asking, or who is asking in a more favorable way to them. And so in thesis, I guess, strong customer intelligence will allow for better prediction of your consumer behavior, which then fuels continually your CX, and then will ultimately help deliver ROI. And so there's a lot more layers to it, but that's the best summary I can provide in a 40-minute window.
This is a really rich topic. We have tons of people talking about, but think of it, it comes down to think about the customer experiences you have and where you've given up your information willingly, and it's a joy, and you're like, oh, it's not a big deal because I'm getting all these things, it's making my life better. So for us, we want to make our, the people that we serve, their lives better, and they brought us in and they're trusting us, right? So how do we make their lives better? So when you do that and you're trying to engage and create a relationship with somebody, it's the same thing. If they have a good experience, they're willing to not only get more information from you and be more open and getting further engagement, they will become your customer, right? I always say a customer starts from the minute they come to your website. That's when they're your customer.
Yeah, I completely agree. And then there's times as a consumer that I've unsubscribed from email lists because I'm either not sure how I've gotten on it in the first place, or it's just no longer relevant because as Lou from the Kellogg team mentioned earlier, consumer expectations change too. So, I might have given my information to a brand at a particular time because I was looking for something, but no longer, need it, because purchase cycles are always different for brand. I think that's why, everyone today keeps saying there's no one size fits all, because there's every brand is so nuanced. I mean, you pick a item and things are different between brands, but even something as like a purchase cycle. And I get emails still from brands that I've unsubscribed from their.
It's really hard to opt out. And you're just like, oh my gosh, why can't I get out? You don't want that to be the experience, because then someone's going to really walk away and be like, no, never, ever, ever will I ever, work with or want anything from this brand ever again.
Exactly. And now that privacy regulations are becoming more and more prevalent, either, at the state level, ultimately maybe a national level, brands could face, and Rich had mentioned this earlier, face some challenges with regulators if they're not managing for opt-outs, or they're not managing for specific state level at this time now preferences. So there's a lot to manage. There's a lot to keep in mind. I think following the whole consent, tech audit, and test and learn strategy will help brands kind of at least give them a little head start for brands that are like, where do I start? I don't know.
Bring in your legal team. Don't forget, bring in your legal. Start doing these things to make sure you're going to be using the right requirements, even in your testing. Say, hey, when this happens, what legally should we be doing, so that you are also testing out your consent messages and the like. Right. So
absolutely. Yeah. Legal is so important, and having the appropriate disclaimers, terms and conditions, and mapping that towards state level laws. Yes. Very, very important. Well, Amisha, this was such a blast. Thank you so much for joining me.
The conversation.
I have a quick outro for us. So for those tuning in, or those that are still with us, rather, if you missed any of today, it will be posted on Brand Innovators YouTube. Amisha and I can post the link on LinkedIn to view on demand once that's available in the coming days. And then just a reminder to register for, actually, Amisha, I didn't tell you I was doing this part. So a reminder to register for Tipalti's Illuminate conference, September 13th through 15th, if you're interested. The conference is dedicated to accelerating your finance future and will include can't miss keynotes, thought-provoking industry roundtables, as well as breakout sessions. It's great for networking, learning, and taking some great ideas back to your financial operations counterparts.
If you're in the Bay Area on September 15th, we'll have celebrity Billy Bean. He's the guy, the inspiration behind the movie Moneyball, on site. So if you're interested, reach out to me and we can get you and your finance team invited.
Awesome. And I also did a quick note for more information. Visit tipalti.com/illuminate. As a call to action. The media buyer in Maine needs a call to action. And so thank you to everyone for tuning in. Thank you to Brand Innovators for hosting us, and a very special thank you to Amisha for your valuable input today.
Thank you so much, Kirsten, and thank you to Influential, and then thank you, Brand Innovators, and hope you have the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
You too, Amisha. That concludes today's event. Thank you all for joining.